welcome to Mosaic. We're going to talk today about an institution that every Catholic knows about, an institution so familiar that many of us perhaps take it for granted, the Catholic parish. Now, the parish has always been the center of Catholic life for the Catholic layperson. Your baptism is there, your funeral will be there, and in between these points, there's participation in Mass every Sunday and an opportunity for year after year of a richly textured, multi-layered life, combining the sacred and sacramental, the educational and social, the recreational and communal. But participation in this parish life has been declining, and parishes face challenges. Our guest today is Dr. Melanie M. Maury, a student of Catholic culture and institutions, and co-author of the important book, Renewing Parish Culture, Building for a Catholic Future. As the book says, the local parish is the cultural home base of American Catholics. And in these smallest and most basic units, the Catholic culture is nurtured, sustained, and transmitted. The vitality of American Catholicism depends to a great extent on the vibrancy of parish life. Well, what are the challenges? What are the possibilities? Please stay with us, and after this short break, join us talking with Dr. Melanie Maury about the Catholic parish. Hello and welcome back. We have with us today Dr. Melanie Maury, and welcome to you. Thank you.
Thank you, John.
A little bit about you. A bachelor's degree from Smith College, master's degrees from Boston College and Harvard University, and a doctorate from Harvard in educational administration. Now, you have a particular expertise in Catholic identity and Catholic culture. You've been a consultant to many Catholic institutions, and today, at the Archdiocese of San Francisco, you are Director of the Office of Catholic Identity, Assessment, and Formation. You've published extensively, including the book that we're basing our discussion on today, called Renewing Parish Culture, Building for a Catholic Future. And you've taught and worked in parishes, so you have hands-on experience. So let me state this. What's the anatomy of a parish? I think it has three groups. It has the people, largest group, the staff, smaller group, and then the priests, if you're lucky enough to have a priest. A priest is one or two or three. So of these three groups, I'd like to have you address the challenges and opportunities for all three. And if you could, let's start with the largest group, the people, the congregation, the people in the pews. We know there's a decline in parish participation. Can you suggest to us what's keeping people away?
Well, one of the things about parishes is they have these internal parts and constituents, actors, but they also live against the backdrop of a larger, wider culture. So myself, I've been a parishioner where I grew up in Salt Lake City, on the East Coast, in Florida, in Seattle, here in San Francisco. The backdrop in each of those places is somewhat different, and it has an impact on the mindset, the attitudes, and the reality of those who are in Catholic parishes. Mm-hmm. So those two things are going to be playing against each other. I think people are largely familiar with a lot of research that's being done that in the United States, which is one of the most religious countries in the world, there is an increasing number of people who identify as none.
N-O-N-E.
N-O-N-E.
Yeah.
People who may have some kind of spiritual attitude, disposition, but they don't identify with any religious tradition. So that's one part. In a place like San Francisco, one of the things that's also interesting is, like many places in the United States, there's a lot of demographic change. There's an article this past weekend in the New York Times about the fact that there is a crisis of children in San Francisco. Unlike most cities, there are only 13% of the population is under the age of 18. Wow. So if there are fewer young people and many more of those identifying as nuns and less involvement of young people in parishes, you have to begin to ask the question, well, what about the future? Where are we going? Is there a succession plan for those of us who are much older and in many ways sustaining parish life here in this archdiocese.
People are out of the habit of going to their parish. Let's say there's not a younger cohort visibly coming up, but what about the older adult Catholics? Have they tapered off in their observance in some way as well?
To some extent. One of the things that's happened in American life is in the 1800s, as an immigrant populations and waves of immigrants came, and many of them were Catholic, Irish, German, Italian. They identified with their national parish. Catholics ran a parallel culture in the United States. We had our own insurance companies, we had our own youth organizations, we had everything that the secular society had, we replicated within Catholic life. And so it was the great meeting place that kept this community tightly together. Mm-hmm. In American culture today, I think it's pretty obvious that with families, the great unifier is sports.
Ah.
So much of their weekends are spent going from this soccer game to that hockey game, and we have very, very busy people. They don't find the need or have the need to have a social anchor in parish life. So they dip in and they dip out in ways that was not the case. The parish was where it was all happening. Your children were going to school there. Your social networks were there. This was your shared experience for a religious group that was not always in good favor in this country.
I think that makes sense. Yeah, in many ways, Catholics were not welcomed in their early history. I think we're as welcome as anyone can be now, but we're losing our distinctive culture in our parishes as, well, I guess a social institution, but it's also losing some vibrancy as a sacramental or sacred institution.
Well, parishes are very interesting. If you look at San Francisco, there are new waves of immigration in California and in San Francisco of very Catholic populations. Latin America,
right?
Mexico, Central America,
Philippines,
the Philippines,
Asians.
Vietnam,
mm-hmm.
To name a few. This is our generation's immigrant wave, mm-hmm. and they are coming with the faith. And where are they going, and how are they experiencing parish life? Those of us who were part of the Irish, Italian, Catholic, German Catholic communities, we see our parishes changing. We see them aging. We see a new generation not particularly connected. And there is this sense of contraction.
Okay.
So what do the people in the pews do? Mm-hmm. I mean, I think there is this tendency to sit in the pews and say, oh, you know, the parish is getting smaller, it's getting older, where are the people? We don't see ourselves as ambassadors of the faith. We aren't reaching out and saying, you're new to the neighborhood, come join us. This sense of there has to be a reason for people to come. There has to be a connection.
On that note, let's take a brief break, and when we come back, we'll discuss the age of the laity, in which laity are taking over more and more of the staffing work at the parishes. Please join us. Hello and welcome back to Mosaic with Dr. Melanie Maury. We're talking about parish culture and the renewal of parish culture. There's been a history of waves of immigration bringing their faith, parishes being expanded and built, many different ethnic groups, and that continues today with vibrant, faithful people working hard in their parishes. Let's move then to the fact that it is, as we like to say, the age of the laity. And in the parish, all these important staffing positions, professional paid positions of various kinds, are being done by laity. I'd like to have you address a certain aspect of this, which is wonderfully explicated in your book. You you report, as many histories have said, that for decades and decades, the sisters, the religious sisters, did this heavy lifting in the parishes and were the go-to people for creating and sustaining and transmitting Catholic culture. That no longer exists. But what you've done in the book is analyzed their approach to their work and the virtues that they exercised and their entrepreneurial and innovative techniques. And I think you're trying to decide if we can imitate those approaches and things and, you know, build a future for ourselves. I'd like you to address that.
Well, I mean, as you say, religious congregations, women's religious congregations, they were the people responsible for transmitting Catholicism. We have a lot of time and attention that we spend, and we focus on the priests, and they certainly are the sacramental leaders and the spiritual leaders of our parishes. But the cultural context was always shaped by nuns. And they had the thickest and richest and deepest culture within the church, and they were responsible for passing that on. And when you examine what they did, they had these little cultural packages that they developed, created, and consistently worked through and moved and adjusted with whichever group they were working with, and with an eye to the future and an eye to always more and better and more and better. So they had this great sense of our best days are coming, and we are the agents of that. And so they had these little cultural packages of a practice that was accompanied by a narrative that had some norms and that had a benefit. And so that particular process is how we are acculturated in any circumstance. And they were magnificent at it.
Give me those four elements again so I can get them.
There's a practice.
Okay.
It's accompanied by a narrative.
Yes.
And there are benefits, and there are norms. Now, I'll give you a classic old one.
Please.
Not one we would necessarily want to revisit today, but it was certainly effective in its time. And that was Sunday Mass. Sunday Mass was required. Attending Mass every single Sunday was the practice.
Yes.
The norm was always, without fail. And the narrative was very, very succinct and clear. Go to Mass, you'll go to heaven. Don't go to Mass, you'll go to hell. The benefit was obvious if you actually did this.
Right.
Now, clearly that is not where we want to go. But the extent to which we've actually developed a compelling narrative for why anyone should go to Mass, we haven't come up with something as compelling. And it is not because you don't go because you don't want to go to hell. You go for an encounter with Christ. But somehow we have got to work on our narratives. We've got to consistently talk about the practice, the narrative, the norm, being every week, and the benefit. What is the benefit to you as an individual and to the church community as a whole? Now, we have this new generation of people who have committed their lives to the service of the church, and they have paid to educate themselves. They work often for far less wage than they might in other places. They are responsible for creating the parish culture,
right,
and working with the pastor in order to make that happen.
One way which I've heard this expressed, I think, is that the lay people are trying to revivify or take over the charism of the religious orders and do the kinds of things they did. What I think is interesting about your book is that you analyze how they accomplished so much, being innovative, insightful. They were, in many instances, the sisters were running corporations and doing all kinds of difficult things that you don't think of meek, obedient sisters doing.
No, the nuns were great women who had such deep faith and such confidence in the providence of God that they were doing God's work, that they had huge dreams. And they made those dreams come true. And they made them come true in our lives. We used to always say that the sisters were able to see in children a capacity they could not see in themselves, and had the energy to help us realize it.
Wow.
it is more difficult in the circumstances today for the people who work in lay ministry. But I think one of the great important lessons that we learned from the sisters is how they viewed young people in this in the passing on of the faith.
Okay.
Our tendency now is to focus on the adults with the idea that they are the first educators of children, and there is this sort of trickle down.
Okay.
The sisters looked at it very differently. They knew that many of the parents weren't all that comfortable doing this. They'd support the sisters. But they focused their attention on the children, and they leveraged that, the love of the parents for the children and their desire for their children's welfare, to bring the parents in and continue their education in the faith. So what about today, when we have fewer young people attending Mass on a regular basis, and there's a fair amount of social pressure not to go?
I see.
Well, are there places in the parish that they can see themselves? Are these lay members of the staff taking a page out of the sisters' books and saying, let's gather all these young people, find places for them, let them know that they belong, that there are things that they can do, that they can contribute to this parish life, and their contribution is important. And when they do, they will bring their parents with them.
I see. And there are benefits. Let's take a break at this moment, and we'll come back. We're going to talk with Dr. Melanie Maury more about parish culture in our next segment. Hello and welcome back. We're talking with Dr. Melanie Maury about parish culture, and we're at the last piece of the parish. It's the rectory. It's the clergy, where the priest or priests live and do their work. Now, you've described the priest's role as being a threefold thing: to offer the Eucharist and the other sacraments, to lead the local community of the faithful, and to help the church spread Christ's message. So that's the perpetual role of the priest. How does the priest fulfill that role in American Catholicism, in an American parish today? There's challenges, there's opportunities.
Well, in many ways, the priests are as powerful, if not more so today, than they were before, but their function is somewhat different. I mean, they were literally sort of the ruler of their turf for a long period of time. To some extent, that is still true. I mean, they have all kinds of canonical responsibility that belongs to them. I think the important thing, though, for the people in the pews is that the parish priest is still the visible leader of the parish. He is the visible, actual, spiritual leader of this community of people. And anybody who's been in a Catholic parish knows that when the pastor changes, it is significant in the life of the parish. Mm-hmm. There is sometimes resistance to that change. Mm-hmm. There's sometimes great joy at that change. But there is an enormous cultural impact. And parish priests set the tone by how they operate with the staff and with the people. And also by the way they perceive their own reality. And that gets played out in the narratives that they share with the people, not only about Scripture, about the faith, but about the community itself. I think it's possible to think of this as a shrinking community. Mm-hmm. And when you do, you get very careful about how do we spend our money? How are we being thrifty?
Okay.
How are we being stewards in that sense, because you see the pool is declining and you're worried about it.
Yeah.
The sisters, and I think in another generation priests as well, had this view of a faith in divine providence and this sense of the tomorrows being better tomorrows, depending upon what they were doing. So they had an expansive view of this gift of the faith, a gift that brought them great joy and one that they wanted to share. And in that, if that's your mindset, what you're going to end up doing is saying, well, maybe we have not a ton now, but it's only because we haven't tapped our resources. It's only because we haven't expanded the pool. Father Peter and I used to talk a lot about trying to grow the market share of Catholics. This mentality of they just haven't heard the good news. They haven't joined us yet. So in that sense, let me give you an example. Coming to San Francisco, I came from the East Coast, which, you know, in the winter it's freezing cold, and in the summer it's sweltering hot, and, you know, parishes have to heat and light these institutions, and they do. If not for the love of the people, certainly for the love of the pipes. But here in California, you know, you think of this very temperate climate. Churches are dark and cold very frequently because people are trying to save money. Sure. And it's not that cold, so we can all, but there's a kind of pinched feeling about things. Whereas if there's this expansive, this is the place, this is sacred ground, this is where we will come together to celebrate the Eucharist, where the Lord will be with us again in Holy Communion. This is a place of warmth and joy and great community. This is God's house. Then you expand, you open up, you make it as beautiful, as inviting, and then the community engages that in the sense of who we are becoming, not what we are losing. So true. In an age of what you call contraction, I think it is true that people have said the more beauty, the better music, the better warmth that you can provide in your church, the more welcoming it'll be, and people will come to get the truth that you're producing as they come to be welcomed into the community as well. You talk about opening up and expanding, and I wanted to close by giving some praise to your book. This book is, I think I could call it a how-to manual for professionals, and yet I'm not a professional, and I've read it and very much enjoyed. All my Post-its are there. I think that it is fascinating because what you've done in here, in part, is to help Catholics relearn the stories of what it means to be Catholic. Things that we take for granted, things we've forgotten about, things we no longer do. You tell fresh stories about why we do them and why we should. So thank you very much for being here. It's all the time we have. Thank you, John. Thanks for joining us on Mosaic. Thank you, Dr. Melanie Mori. This has been very enlightening. We'll see you at our next program, and thanks for listening.